Broadcasting live from the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona, in the heart of the great American Southwest. It's Erskine Overnight. Now, here's Erskine.
It's a pleasure to have Dr. Mel Gordon, a professor of theater arts at the University of California at Berkeley. He's written over 100 articles and entries on American, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Yiddish theater, and the author of several books. One of my favorites is the one that we're going to talk about tonight. And to get this book, he had to delve into reams of archives to uncover the true story of Erik Jan Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish clairvoyant. Known as the prophet of the Third Reich, Hanussen predicted the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler. He's also credited in blending occult beliefs with the Nazi radical politics. One of the most fascinating books I have ever read. Mel, welcome to Erskine Overnight, my friend.
Hey, Erskine, how are you?
I'm good. This book is nothing but hot. I mean, it's incredible. 14 stories, 1937 on Hanussen, 5-part series in Red Book, possible movies, September 1942, completely forgotten. What's going on?
Well, first of all, how historical knowledge is controlled sounds very paranoid and strange, but the true Time Monthly of the 1930s had some of the greatest writers and some of the most incisive and fantastic writing, and it almost all disappeared. For one thing, libraries didn't keep True magazine, Keyhole Spy magazine, international thriller, detective cases, and so forth. But in fact, really great writers, people like Arthur Koestler, and many others, especially European writers who had been sent off from exile in Europe, couldn't get any work during the American Depression except with these magazines. And
now, a lot of the best writers out of Europe, a lot of the best writers from Germany, all left there. They came over here, and so they were writing these pulp rags. And some of the things that they wrote were amazing, and some of the stories were about Hanussen because this guy's a real enigma. He did virtually everything.
Well, one of the things, these journalists were in a kind of low pulp world of mostly McFadden magazines and so forth. But Bernard McFadden, the bodybuilding king and the tabloid of Kingpin, actually wanted to help them. He's a sort of unsung anti-fascist hero. But they had to write pulp-like stories. And the most fantastic pulp story, almost all of them knew from Germany and Austria, was the story of Erik Jan Hanussen. Hanussen was this Houdini-like character who helped Hitler come to power. And after Hitler became Reichschancellor, it was discovered that Hanussen, one of Hitler's closest friends in 1932, was not just Jewish, but the grandnephew of a wonder rabbi and so forth, and he was executed immediately. So it was a great Shakespearean-type story that turned out to be true and had so many ramifications that was very, very hot in the 1930s telling this story. But by 1942, when America was geared up for total war, the story of Hanussen not only disappeared, supposed to be a Hollywood movie, but the Red Book stories, the Kessler stories, fantastic, all these famous journalist stories were deleted from their archives. So it's as if they didn't write these things, but and some libraries had these, but very few. But you can find them today on eBay everywhere.
You were very lucky to get the details. History,
but it did disappear from the normal way scholars do research.
Let's go back to March 1932. Adolf Hitler was unelectable, virtually unelectable. He was a liability to the National Socialist Party. The little fellow's running around with a little mustache, and he was doing all these things that just were kind of crazy.
That historians often talk about the inevitability of Hitler's rise, but in fact, in the year 1932, the year before he came to power, it seemed exactly the opposite. that Hitler put everything into this election in March 1932 and did very poorly. He did so poorly, in fact, that the Nazi Party, which was a sort of huge revolutionary movement, had splintered into 3 fragments. Only one of the 3 fragments supported Hitler. 2 of them wanted to get rid of Hitler, thinking that they could never come to power. Hitler wasn't even a German citizen, couldn't even vote in his own election. That he was technically an Austrian. And also, he seemed to mostly people in Berlin, but elsewhere, as a kitschy figure, as a kind of ridiculous looking person. And the Nazis had, socialists and had industrialists and people close to the military and so forth, and all of them began to turn against Hitler. So now we get into the story of Erik Jan Hanussen. Hanussen was this stage magician whose best friend was Peter Lorre, and was friends with Dietrich and virtually the entire cultural apparatus of that pre-Hitler Berlin. Hanussen had a weekly tabloid paper, a rather interesting one, called the Hanussen Zeitung, the Hanussen newspaper. And Hanussen, the week after Adolf Hitler looked like he was in the dustbin of history, like Pat Buchanan running for president, that the week afterwards, Hanussen published on the front page of his paper that he went into the future, into the 4th dimension, and saw 1 year from now that Adolf Hitler would be Reichschancellor. And this prediction was so funny, like saying Pat Buchanan, the stars say Pat Buchanan would be president in 2008, that everyone grabbed this newspaper and talked about it and laughed. But it also came to Hitler, and this gave him new hope. Hitler was very superstitious Austrian who believed in Bavarian superstition, and he made a note to meet this Hanussen. And this is how Hanussen became involved for real in German politics and began to change history.
Well, the other thing that changed history was Prince Leo Lebkowski, or Lebkowitz, and he had an auto crash that was predicted 2 days before by Hanussen.
What happened was...
And that fit perfectly in that, because then he was the man who was never wrong, and Hitler's going, this man's never wrong, and he predicted I'm going to be the leader. What about it, fellas? And everyone said,
Here, let me go backwards just for a second, because you hit on exactly the right thing. That in March 1932, Hanussen had predicted Hitler would become Reichschancellor in a year. 2 months later, there was the most famous automobile race in Berlin. And Hanussen had heard through his girlfriend that one of the leading racers was not only not going to finish because he had stomach cancer, but he was so sick that he could barely drive his racing car. So Hanussen then called a press conference saying he'd gone into the future and in the 4th dimension yet again, and 2 days later that the Count was not only not going to finish first, but he was going to die, which is exactly what happened.
And Hanussen became known as the man who's never wrong, and
right. So
all Germany started taking a second look. We've got to take a break. All Germany took a second look at Adolf Hitler at that point. More when we get back.
Now don't go postal. Erskine will be right back.
Here at the retirement home, we always listen to Erskine overnight. It's all we got to listen to.
Erik Jan Hanussen, a guy who started out from a theatrical family. He always wanted to be on stage. He told all sorts of weird stories about things, how he saved people from fire when he was a kid and that sort of thing. Fire keeps coming up in his life. He practiced a thing called Hellstromism, which was actually done by Alex Hellstrom. It actually went further back than that, according to Mel Gordon. And what Mel gives a whole history behind it that I didn't know. And what this is called contact mind reading. You grab somebody's hand and they will lead you to various places, or muscle reading. We're not going into it, but a guy named Kreskin has made his living off of that one part of Hanussen's act. You've got other things that Hanussen did that were just totally amazing. He did a telepathic event with a plane where he was telepathically from the ground telling the pilot where to go. This was done on one of the Apollo studies, one of the Apollo astronauts. They tried the same sort of thing. He was in films. He did some very, very bizarre events. He came up with some challenges and things that were just so incredible as to be unbelievable. He was a PR man to the max. He became a great performer. He wasn't when he started. He was a person who could think on his feet. He came up with the Queen of Will after watching this big Polish guy who could bend iron rods. He found out how a lot of that was done. It had been done in the United States by someone called the Georgia Magnet, but as a whole act he built up, and the story of that is fabulous. In other words, this is a man who influenced entertainment and entertainers. People took just bits and pieces of his act and made reputations off of it for years to come, didn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, one aspect of Hanussen that was unusual in interwar Europe is that most entertainers, most magicians and mind readers and so forth had really one note to play, that they were comical, or they were scientific, or they were occultist, or there was some erotic component and so forth. That what Hanussen was able to do was to mix all of these. Typically, he would start an evening in a music hall saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I need you not to believe in the miracles you're about to see here." And then he would count down and to say, "I detect some of you still believe. I'm very disappointed." And everything would be twisted in Hanussen's way. He would use humor. He'd use scientific terminologies of how clairvoyance is a point on the time-space continuum of Einstein and so forth. And then he often did something really fantastic. He would end his evening by solving a crime that had not been solved in the town or city. And he was able to do this for real on stage because usually the police were so incompetent in these villages that he could figure out just through intuition and asking around who is responsible for a murder or arson or theft. And there's at least 15 proven sequences where Hanussen solved murders that were unknown and not solved before him. And so he was able to piggyback on his successes to create great, great excitement all over the world.
It was amazing, the things that he used. One of the things he also did was he went to various institutions where they checked out his psychic abilities. In some cases he was successful, other cases he wasn't. I know one case that you talked about, which was absolutely extraordinary, where he went to the scientists. And, of course, scientists are very easy to fool. Sorry, but they are extraordinarily easy to fool. And he absolutely, totally fooled them. This was Leopold Thoma, who was a psychology unit of the Vienna police. The man ended up working for Hanussen. And what he did there and what he proved was very similar to the same thing that Uri Geller did at Stanford Research that propelled him into the fame that he saw. So they took a page out of Hanussen. Whether or not he knew it or not, whether or not Uri or Kreskin or Dunninger or any of these people studied Hanussen, they were using the facts as put out by Hanussen, and each one took a little piece off of what Hanussen had done. Hanussen tried everything. He did everything. It was incredible. I've never seen anybody who's done so many different acts, and they all, after his first few years, which were pretty much a flop, but once he was in the military and started going, they all worked for him. I mean, he was appearing before the queens and the royalty of Europe at that time. He was making lots and lots of money. His trip to the U.S. was not too successful. He's supposed to be booked into Keith's Circuit. He ends up in Hoboken. That wasn't a good deal, was it?
No. He the one place that didn't work, well, actually, it was a few places. He thought because he was dependent on a certain contact with the audience, and when he didn't speak their language, which spoke German, that he thought that something would be missing. But Hanussen was an interesting character in the sense that he used trickery, like Uri Geller and other people, but he also mixed it with extremely interesting intuition and good psychological thinking. For instance, Hanussen had ways of guessing anyone's favorite number from 1 to 20. And he had a whole system of grids that men normally want to say 7. If they're gambling men, is their favorite number. But they'll never say it to a man. So he'd ask them to concentrate. And if their eyes would flick upwards, he knew they'd write down 8. And if they flick downwards, they'd put down 6 on the paper. And he had all this, and the Hungarians normally want to put 8 or 9, and women like 3, and so forth. He had all these different systems that he'd learned over the decades of how people think. And sometimes for this trick, he'd set up the number by having a beautiful woman introduce them, saying, I was 21 when I first met Hanussen. And according to Hanussen, that sets up the number 3 in men's minds, because they want to sleep with the woman. So they're thinking 3, and he says, put down your favorite number, and they put down 3. So he had all different ways of configuring the way people think, but also he used trickery, as I said, and he was very, very skilled at it. But one of his favorite techniques was hypnotism, which people like Freud thought he was the most talented hypnotist in Europe. And Hanussen's specialty typically was to find the most skeptical women in the audience, usually journalists. And then he would hypnotize them into sexual orgasm on the stage. And that, at the beginning of a show, would be so stunning to an audience that they would believe all kinds of crazy stuff he was about to do afterwards.
Can't think of a woman who wouldn't want to go see him doing that. So we'll be right back with Mel Gordon, author of Erik Jan Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish Clairvoyant.
Now don't go getting your pantyhose in a bunch. Erskine will be right back.
Now that you don't have to kick Dick around anymore, you're probably like all the rest. You listen to Erskine overnight.
Talking with Mel Gordon, author of Erik Jan Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish Clairvoyant. This book will knock your socks off. It is absolutely fabulous. Here's a guy who was Jewish, who was the clairvoyant to Hitler. They met many, many, many times. He made a couple of mistakes. One of them was on the astrological chart he did for Hitler. They had to change it in the future for any other astrologers because his chart showed Hitler falling from power, didn't it?
Yeah, this became a serious problem. In 1932, the year before the Nazis came to power, there was this sweep of magical thinking that showed up in all the popular culture of Germany. Monthly magazines and weekly pictorial magazines, somewhat like Life, suddenly began to have astrological columns and graphology columns and characterology, looking at the shape of arms and legs to determine personality. And this whole belief in magical systems, which actually helped the Nazis, began to grow, and it's at this time that Hanussen, in his astrological newspaper, did a serious chart of Hitler's birth and determined that Hitler's greatest year would be 1940, but in 1944 there'd be a disaster. And the Nazis took the belief in astrology, which was probably shared by maybe as many as 15 to 20% of all Germans. Quite seriously, that they took this to be such a serious problem, this astrological chart, that they changed the time of Hitler's birth by 2 hours, changed his fortune. And this was a great problem. There were 9 or 10 astrological newspapers that all already had Hitler's birth date and were doing similar analysis of it. So there were many reasons that the Nazis killed Hanussen when they found out he was Jewish, but one was because he had a kind of dangerous knowledge, an occult knowledge, the Nazis felt, about Hitler, and this had to be excised.
Now, one of the people he dealt with was SS leader Helldorf, who was anti-Jewish and very much into the black arts. But apparently he kind of liked Hanussen because he was so into the black arts, he thought Hanussen was real, right?
Helldorf was a great historical figure, was this dissolute, decadent German count. And in Germany in the 30s and even before, the Nazis had an unequal representation in various places in Germany. The weakest, actually, was in Berlin. And German magazines saw very few Nazis in Berlin before 1932. And Helldorf was given charge of the SA, the early stormtroopers. And he was a gambler, and he was bisexual, and he was into all the occult aspects. And when he saw Hanussen, he became enthralled, as many people did. He just couldn't figure out why Hanussen had so many Jews working on his newspaper, why all his best friends were Jewish, and so forth. And Hanussen said that, the Jews are good people is sometimes a little duplicitous.
He even invited Helldorf to a party, and he said, okay, we'll keep down the number of Jews who are at the party.
Right. And people like Peter Lorre were Jewish, of course, and many famous cultural figures were friends of Hanussen. But what had happened is that after Hanussen made his predictions about the Avus auto race and Hitler's rise to power, that the Nazi press began to use him. That there were so many, as I said, so many tens of millions of Germans believed in astrology and the occult that they believed in Hanussen. And the communists made a fatal mistake, that they decided, instead of attacking Hitler in the summer of 1932, they would attack what they thought was the weakest link in Nazism, its belief in magic, in occult. So they thought they would attack Hanussen. They had 28 headline articles between the summer of 1932 and the time Hitler came to power in January 1933. They had more attacks on Hanussen than Hitler. And one of the things they discovered was that Hanussen had 3 Jewish weddings, was circumcised, and his real name was Herschmann Steinschneider. And they tried to run with this, but in fact, it wasn't successful. That the bulk of the Germans, instead of turning away from Nazism because it was involved with magic and the occult, actually became attracted to it.
Now, Hanussen actually gave to Hermann Goering, and all of a sudden at the same time, from over in England, they discovered this white goat ritual. What the heck is a white goat ritual? Well,
1932, that magic year I keep referring to, was also the centennial of Goethe's death. Goethe, Wolfgang von Goethe, was the greatest German personality, really invented the language and the culture of Germany in the time of Napoleon, and of course the writer of Faust. So in the British Museum, they found a secret book from the 1500s that Goethe may have seen when he wrote Faust, about how to transform a goat into a living person with the use of minstrel blood and a virgin and scrapings from church bells and things like that. So as a kind of gag or scientific interest, that the newsreel companies had a famous German parapsychologist whose name was Harry Price go to Bavaria to try this ritual out. And of course he went with a very beautiful British German girl who everyone doubted to be a virgin. And they filmed this ceremony with abracadabra ceremony, and nothing happened, actually, and it was kind of silly. But then Hanussen said something amazing. He said, if you bring this to Berlin, I will change a goat into a human being. And sure enough, it was filmed. The goat was there. Hanussen had his own virgin. And Leni Riefenstahl watched this ceremony, and you can see in the film cameras, that Hanussen, in front of all the film cameras, changes the goat into a human being.
Well, this is the same guy who earlier had taken a dead sheep, over in Europe. We're not comparing goats and sheep in that way, but he took a dead sheep and brought it back to life when he was operating under a different name of El Sadar, or the Wizard, and that very well saved his life. He was in the occult melodrama Dr. Svengali, among others.
In this case, I discussed a lot of the tricks of Hanussen with people who lived with him and his daughter, and people who worked with him. This was accomplished by having his virgin with extremely long gowns. And underneath the gown was a midget dressed as a Bavarian peasant. And when the magnesium powder was flashed in front of everyone, he switched the midget to the goat, and the other goat went...
So why don't you just kick back and let's listen to Erskine Overnight while I puff on my favorite stogie. Hey now, I wouldn't lie to you.
Jan Erik Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish clairvoyant, otherwise known, in my opinion, as the man who knew everything, who is never wrong, the man who is never wrong. That is his claim to fame. But his claim to fame was, this guy was so perceptive. He was an incredible showman, incredible person who was able to observe like nobody else. Was he clairvoyant? You know, perhaps when you read some of the predictions at the end of the book, perhaps he did have certain clairvoyant possibilities, because there's a thin line between illusion and reality. He set the pace for every psychic entertainer who has come since. He also did it all. Codex, codes where one person gives a secret code to someone else. He was the best. Reading by holding somebody's hand, which is as close to real mind reading as you're going to get, an act that made Kreskin a household word. This man was so far ahead of his time, and yet he did some very, very strange things, and perhaps brought the occult stronger into the Nazi party. Now, he wanted to change this goat into a virgin, which sounds a little bit like, well, we go to heaven, we'll get 72 virgins, but the Nazis only needed one. So how did he do that again? Because we're at the very end, and you said she had a long flowing dress and a midget.
Yeah, you know, it was probably the power of Hanussen preventing me from revealing his trick. And, from some other place. What happened was, Hanussen, instead of having one virgin, had two. And the virgins all had long, spangly dresses. And underneath one of the dresses was a midget. And when Hanussen said abracadabra over the goat, he sprinkled some magnesium powder that flashed. And in that fraction of a second, he was so quick and cunning that he switched the midget from one dress and the goat going under another dress, which you couldn't see at all. I mean, I have it on film. And suddenly, out of nowhere, in literally less than a full second, there was a midget who represented Hitler, because he was in a Bavarian costume, which Hitler was associated with, and the goat represented Germany. So Germany was turned into Hitler in this outdoor ceremony that was filmed.
Now, they started and Hitler promised to start a University of the Occult. They had a Palace of the Occult, and the entire inner circle of that, the Glass Palace, was designed by Hanussen. Now, it seems like he would have been extraordinarily useful and would have become the spiritual mentor of the Nazi Party had it not been for the Reichstag fire. Is that the way you're seeing it, that it absolutely happened that way? Or were a lot of Nazis upset with him because of having Adolf Hitler's ear, of his friendship with Hermann Goering, as his friendship with Helldorf, and the fact that he was Jewish?
Well, there's so many factors, and they're all, absolutely amazing, what had happened. One of the factors was that Hitler and Hanussen were born very near each other, about 100 miles away, within a month of each other. They were both born in Austria. They grew up going to the same drinking places and the Prater, the sort of entertainment district in Vienna. They both fought in World War I as lance corporals, and they both had invented names, invented pasts, and Austrian accents. And they liked the same foods, these Austrian foods. So when they met, Hitler suddenly found a fellow Austrian in the midst of this completely, or mostly Prussian, Nazi hierarchy. So they became friends talking about food, the sort of natural thing. And this created a lot of jealousy of the people around Hitler. They thought that this is not a good thing. And when they found out what Hanussen was Jewish, Hanussen was so clever. He managed to create papers stating that he was actually Danish, that his parents were Danish aristocrats who were climbing near a Jewish village in Bohemia. Right. And they died, and a rabbi adopted him. That's why he looked Jewish, and he spoke Yiddish and liked Jews. But he wasn't Jewish at all. And
but the other thing was, when he met with Adolf Hitler, he virtually had Adolf Hitler with his mouth open off of some of the effects he showed him.
Right. And according to another Jewish magician, Fred Marion, who later came to the U.S. on the Ed Sullivan Show, Marion asked Hanussen what a dangerous game he was playing, and Hanussen thought that Hitler had never met a non-communist, non-capitalist, non-exploitive Jew that at the right time he'll explain he's Jewish, and therefore he shouldn't hate Jews. But naturally that never happened.
No.
Instead, what happened is that Hitler came to power in a very strange way. The reactionary nationalists were actually the Nazis' most bitter enemy, not the communists, the socialists. And they wanted to get rid of Hitler once and for all. And they thought that by making him Reichschancellor, they would show the German people that Hitler couldn't rule, didn't have the power, didn't have the temperament or personality to rule Germany. And
we'll take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Erskine has gone to see a man about a mule, but he'll be right back.
Here at the retirement home, we always listen to Erskine overnight. It's all we got to listen to.
Listen to some of Hanussen's predictions. 2000, paper money will be replaced with electronic accounting. This is a man who died in 1930s, the early 1933. The Japanese army will burn Manila in 1942. Confirmed. In the final Reichstag elections, anti-communist bloc will receive 52% plurality. They received 51.9%. Confirmed. Wars in the year 2000 be fought with television monitors instead of artillery and airplanes. Think about it, with the wars being fought with the monitors tracing the missiles as they're going. You say incorrect? I say that's pretty much correct. Germany's neighbors in 1940 will be England and Russia, partially confirmed. Capital of the world in 2500 will be Prague or San Francisco. We don't know yet. Sometime 42, the Eiffel Tower will be carried away for scrap iron. Came close, incorrect. So many others. Invalids in the future will be killed by state agencies, confirmed. Joseph Goebbels died in 1943. He was off by a couple of years. Poland be occupied and divided in 1939, confirmed. Radioactive weapons will determine the outcome of the next war, pretty much confirmed. I mean, a lot of it, when you're looking at it, a lot of what he had to look at and what he surmised was pretty much on target. This was an incredible person. But after the Reichstag fire, Hitler came in with the Enabling Act, and Hanussen was one of the first victims, wasn't he?
Yeah, yes. And this is a lot of research and even new material. Is Hanussen in his newspaper and at the opening of his Palace of the Occult had predicted the burning of the Reichstag several days before it happened in front of all the newspaper editors, and then it happened. So this becomes one of the great historical puzzlements, because the Reichstag fire gave Hitler power to become dictator over Germany. In a way, it's really the first step to World War II. And the mystery of Hanussen within this has created all kinds of theories and whatnot. The most plausible is also the most fantastic. That the person who set the Reichstag on fire, confessed to it, was this Dutch communist, van der Lubbe, and who seemed totally crazy. There was no reason the communists would set the Reichstag on fire at that time. And but he, to the day he died, maintained that he had done it. And now a theory that's widely popular is that Hanussen had hypnotized him into doing it.
And the testimony and everything looks like it could have been. Erik Jan Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish Clairvoyant, by Mel Gordon. Fabulous book, available at all the bookstores. Am I correct? If they don't have it in, you can contact Feral House.
Go to Amazon, and they will be glad to send you a copy. There's lots of... I'm glad you like it so much, of course. And one of the things I tried to do is such a fantastic story that I tried to put a lot of photographs and documents in the book.
Oh, it's loaded with that. You're going to want a copy of this. If there's one book that I wanted this summer, this is it. Jan Erik Hanussen, Hanussen, Hitler's Jewish Clairvoyant by Mel Gordon. You're going to love it. Mel, thank you for being on, my friends.
Erskine, thanks so much, and I was glad to spend overnight with you.
Yes, thank you. Next week, Al Martin. Sweet dreams.
Ladies and gentlemen, Erskine has left the building. So, until tomorrow night, sweet dreams.